Hey everybody, Elisa here. I have Dawn with me. Oh wait, you're on this side. Dawn.
I'm on this
Okay.
side.
From Dawn Michelle Tarot. Hello.
Hello.
We're doing the next video in our series about practice tarot and practice. And we're going to be talking about personification, which is a hot topic, I feel like, in the tarot community. Do you or don't you? That's like the thing.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any in the middle either. It's either like, yeah,
No.
you do, or
Or you
no,
definitely don't.
no, you do not.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very polarizing thing. Like yeah, you're right. I don't know anybody who's ever spoken about I do sometimes. I do with these decks, but not these decks. So that's interesting because I'm actually with certain things I do. It does depend on the deck, but not so much with this. So we both personify. That's our sort of our starting place.
That's our starting point. We totally do. So we got no experience with the not personification.
No, that's just like the natural way we do it.
Yeah. Maybe we should define what personification means.
Yeah, let's start there. So if you have no idea what we're talking about, yeah. So for me, personification is particular with my decks. I feel like different decks have different personalities. So it's literally like an energy or a vibe or a mood or like personality is the best word. So some decks might feel sassy and some decks might feel gentle and comforting and some decks might feel very pointed and blunt and some might feel sort of neutral and objective, you know? What about you?
Pretty much the same. Yeah. It's kind of putting what I see is kind of putting human characteristics on an inanimate object. And like, I think the reason that I at least do it, because like, I'm going to take your advice and only speak from my me place. I think the reason I do it is because I feel like as humans, like even though me place, but still as humans, like the idea of personification and like seeing something through that humanistic view, I think is what helps us to kind of make sense of things in our little human brains.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Like if it's kind of like if I personify it, then I've put it a human characteristic that I can identify with and then I can understand what that characteristic means to me.
And like relate with it.
And relate to it personally.
Yeah.
So like other things that I personify is like real common is like personification of vehicles, right?
True. Yeah.
Like my car has a different energy than Kevin's motorcycle. That's a personification.
Right. For sure.
So, like, and I mean, other thing, I joke I do it with everything, but I don't. Like, I don't personify my refrigerator.
Yeah.
But like some of my like other tools, and I feel like books are kind of in the same space for me.
Yeah.
I feel like you can kind of personify those a little bit too, because they have certain energies and those kind of personality traits that I think just help us make sense of the world.
Yeah.
We can only do things through our human lens. So we put a human term on things.
Yeah. And I think if to me, it becomes something that I do naturally or that is important to me when I want to have a relationship with something, when I want to feel like I'm bonded to it in some way, or that, like that. I feel like I would be the exact same way with art tools if I was really into art. Like this brush would have this energy or mood, or this one would have that one. And I think for me, it's like I do it with things that I want to connect with, bond with, have a relationship with. That's the best way I can think of to put it. But I totally agree with you on the point of if you assign or you sort of perceive human characteristics in a non-human object, you're giving yourself a way to relate to that object, to interact with it in a way that's connecting. Oh, I bumped my computer. But like, that's the thing I feel like that really hits home for me is the ability to connect, to bond. So yeah, like I feel like the simplest way to describe it or what it feels like is I don't see it like people. I don't see my decks as being sentient, for example, but I definitely see them as like having traits. So that's what strongly affects what deck I'm going to reach for in a different situation, right? If I'm in the mood for this kind of a deck, or if I need this kind of a conversation, in the same way that I feel like you'd go to a different friend for different types of things to get a different type of support or feedback or whatever it is that you need in that moment. So I think it's kind of like that for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm all over the place, but hopefully
I think books are kind of that similar. Like if you are looking for, you know, advice about a particular thing, or you want to learn about a particular thing, you would go to a book about that thing. You're not going to go to a fiction piece, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of in that same framework. And that it also, I think the other thing that we don't maybe tend to acknowledge a lot when we talk about personification is that it gives us all a shared language. So if I tell you that deck for me reads really soft and loving and supportive, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Totally.
You know that feeling, right?
Yeah.
Because even though the deck I'm talking about maybe doesn't do that for you, somewhere in your collection, you have a deck that does that for you. So
that's
it creates
a really good point.
Language that we can all use to talk about all these different decks and how we work with them.
Yep. And it's funny because I think in a lot of the tarot tags that go around the community, we use terms that are very personified terms to describe our decks generally. And I don't know that maybe it's that people that don't personify their decks tend not to participate in those tags, but it feels like we have tags where we say, what's your sassiest deck? What's the deck that will tell you the truth no matter what? Well, in theory, if we weren't personifying our decks, then every deck would be able to answer every prompt in that way, right? If it's like, what's your sassiest deck? They should all be equally sassy unless you're personifying them in some way, or you're, you know what I mean? Right. So, and that's the thing that actually that kind of baffles me about personification, or I rather people that don't personify, is like, I guess I wouldn't understand why I would pull different decks for different readings without that layer, without that personification. Right. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah. Because otherwise, I mean, it's the same thing like that old saying, right? You only need one deck, right?
Yeah.
Well, of course, we all know. Like, we all know. You only need one. But because we view everything through a human emotional lens, a lot of us like to have a variety of choices. And I think that is, in essence, what personification is. It's just putting a verbal descriptor, and most of the time it's an emotional descriptor, because most of the key phrases, the things that we use in our language with personification, they're all based in our emotional attachment to the deck. Right. Absolutely. So, you know, comfort, sassy, whatever it is, those are all feeling words, right? We attach feeling words to them. And so I think if you weren't, you know, if you don't personify, then like, yeah, any deck can work for anything. But, and I think that's true across the board anyway, but because I personify, certain decks feel like they resonate with the energy of whatever it is I'm trying to work with than others.
Yeah, it's actually a really integral part of my practice to personify. It affects what deck I'm going to pull for a client based on what question they've asked. It's going to affect what deck I'm going to pull for myself. It's going to affect how I engage with that deck in general. So I have a question for you then. So do you personify both tarot and oracle?
Yes. Using that lens of, you know, using feeling words to describe my decks. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like though I feel like my tarot is more diverse.
Yeah.
And my oracle feels like it sits in just a few different slots. So that would be, I think that would be the main difference between oracle and tarot for me. It's more of like how much, whereas I feel like I have a broader range of tarot and a more narrow view, or a more narrow collection of oracle. And I wonder, now that that's coming to mind, is that because oracle tends to have more of an affirmative?
I was just about to say, yep.
Like
I feel like oracles tend to be more supportive and and affirming and gentle in general than tarot. Although we're starting to see a shift in that. We're starting to see decks come out that have a much more like blunt or have some shadow in them. But it's, I think that oracles do tend to lean more positive. So it does shift what kinds of personalities you might perceive in your oracle decks, for sure.
I'm totally here for the more balanced oracles. I think it's great.
Same. Yeah, same. I get really excited actually to reach for decks that have more the occasional punchy card, or even decks that lean more shadowy or more pokey, because that's so uncommon in oracles that it makes them really refreshing when we have them that have decks that do that.
Yeah.
What about, how do you feel this came up recently? A friend, I think it was Marlena, in like a group chat, asked asked like the group how we felt about animism, and I had to Google it because I'm like,
Oh yeah,
okay,
yeah.
what's animism? So I have this on our list to chat about because I was curious how you feel. So my understanding of animism being that like everything has a soul or everything has some sort of spirit within it. I guess where do you sit with animism, and then how does that align or how does it overlap with personification for you, if it does at all?
Well, I'm gonna like qualify that with like I'm not an animist
Same.
per se, right?
Yeah.
I do believe that living things have spirit, or spirit's not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for?
Soul?
They like not soul, because I think soul's a different thing. See, this is where you get into
Oh
language.
yeah. Yep. Energy?
Energy. That's the word I'm looking for. Like, I don't necessarily think that like if, and just because it has energy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's sentient. So like, I think that's a really big gray area. I like when it comes to my decks, I would not see them as like an animistic object.
Yeah.
For me, they have an energy in the sense that like everything is literally energy, right? Like our whole
Yeah.
world is made up of energy. I feel like there's some maybe of the energy that gets added in from the creator's intentions and whatnot, but I feel like
Yes.
the bigger part of that is mine.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's not necessarily like the thing itself has energy, but it's like a holder for my energy. I definitely don't see them as being sentient or have a soul or alive in any way, shape, or form. For me, they're paper and ink. They are,
Can
which
you
is why I'm
imagine?
okay with cutting
I
them.
just I was just gonna say, I'm literally as you're saying this, I'm like, oh my god, can you imagine if you actually thought your cards had a soul and then you were chopping them up?
No, right? It's just a little haircut. It's okay, right? It's just like a
Fine.
little haircut.
It's just a little trim. We just need to
No.
settle down. Like that's all it is. That is hilarious. But I think actually our views are very aligned on this. Like I
Mhm.
don't think of my decks as sentient. I don't think of them as having soul. I think my beliefs on animism or on objects being sacred or having energy, it more or less aligns with quantum physics and the idea that all matter is got some kind of movement, and there's this idea that particles, and I don't know, I'm terrible at explaining it, but that sort of aligns with how I see it. I think everything has energy. But I do feel like decks have, maybe it's my perception of them as paper, but because I feel the same way about journals, about books. I feel like the way that those objects in general feel, it's as if they could be kind of sponge-like for energy. And I think the same thing about rocks or any other object,
Yeah.
honestly. Like it can kind of absorb your imprint or your intentions with it. So I think for me, where this might have some sort of an overlap would be if if tarot and oracle decks that you work with regularly, if you personify them. So if you see, like my Deviant Moon's a great example. That has a very strong personality to me. It has a very strong vibe.
Mhm.
But every time I work with it and I think of it in that way, I reinforce that vibe. So it's almost as though even if that deck came to me with absolutely no personality of its own, excuse me, but it's just me like layering it on top of it
Mhm.
and like infusing it in it every time I work with it, I'm creating more and more. It's like I'm making that personality bigger just by
Mhm.
every time I interact with it, as if it has that personality.
Right.
So it's kind of almost like the way that I believe is that even if this is complete, like I to some degree or another think this is completely in my head. Like this is just how I choose to interact with the object.
Mhm.
But can I over time give it more of that vibe and make it more than what it is on its own?
Mhm.
Did you follow any of that? Because I feel like I
I
went into woo
totally
territory.
No. I totally followed it, because I think like it's similar to if you have a deck that you've used for years and years and years, right?
Yeah.
Or even like a year, right? And you've used it a lot and you develop that personal relationship with it. So I have multiple copies of the Llewellyn Tarot, right? Everybody knows this.
Yeah.
My original copy feels totally different in my hand than any other copy I own. And it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a cardstock issue, because I have a duplicate from the same print run from the same year, because that's how anal I am when I went to get a backup. No. Can't just have the same deck.
Has to be the same
It's,
print.
it's got to be the same print. It's got to be the same cardstock. It's got to be from the same run. So I tracked one of those down. It feels totally different. It
Yep.
feels totally different in my hand.
Yep, it's the same exact thing with my Mom's Tarot. My first edition I only use for myself, and it definitely feels different than
Mhm.
my travel edition or my trimmed borderless second edition. I've got
Mhm.
3 different versions of that deck, and they all feel different, actually.
Mhm.
because I use each one in a different way. And I think that's the thing, is I interact with it differently and it has a different feeling. And like my original Osho Zen Tarot is the same story. Like it's the one that I've used for years and years and years. I've picked up other copies and felt literally nothing. So it's like, it's strange to me, but yeah, that is absolutely a thing, that we sort of imbue them with our own intention and energy, which aligns also with how I practice magic and how I view all of that, with the idea that we can just add so much intention and so much power to something by feeding it to that intention over and over again. So same thing.
It's that whole, like, you know, it kind of goes back to that same idea of like, you manifest stuff, right? But that's like a fun buzzword, right? If you think about it enough, you put enough intention into it, like the amount of work that we do with these decks and the type of work. And I think that's a huge part of it, because I have decks that I'm not near as like bonded to. And so then I don't, like, their perceived energy, their personification isn't as strong for me as other decks that I've done a ton of work with, and very specific work. And that's why I think part of that personification ends up locking decks into jobs.
Yes.
For me, because like they feel like that's their job, right? I'm not going to go to a plumber. My house is on fire.
Yes.
So, and that's, for me, that's how decks work too. And why I like having a big collection, because again, my house is on fire. I don't need a plumber.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a good point. It's kind of the pro con in a way of personifying your decks. And I guess what I want to say about that is that I feel like there's the pro is that you have these decks that can fulfill certain purposes and like you said, be a plumber or be a fireman or whatever it is that you need in that moment. But at the same time, then there's a limiting factor, or there can be a limiting factor. Like I'm never going to go to the Deviant Moon for a supportive reading. I go to the Deviant Moon when I need my ass kicked. Like that's what I go to that deck for. Right. And so it's the same thing. Like in a way it can, while it can be a benefit because you build this strong relationship for this job with this particular deck, at the same time, it also kind of weirdly becomes limiting for that deck, because now it's boxed in. It's kind of like if you get to know a character like through a TV show that you really love or anything like that, and then you see them in a different role, you're like, this doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me.
Get back in the role you're supposed to be. And like that's how actors get boxed into certain types of roles, because they get so beloved in one type of role that they can never work in a different kind of role. Like you have to always be the heartthrob, or you have to always be the this or whatever.
So we typecast our decks is what we
typecast our deck. So
not all of them.
No, true. But have you found, so do you have some decks that have like stronger personalities than others? Like they're very like specific, and then some that are much more like multi personality.
Yeah, like the Barbara Walker, that's like a great example of a deck that I completely personify. It has one voice, and I call it my salty grandma deck, because that's the voice it talks to me with, where it's like, it's going to tell me what I need to know, but it really doesn't have time for my BS. So like, just leave already and let's move on.
Yep.
And it's that way every time, like every time I work with that deck. And then I have other things that are, you know, a bit more like my Dreaming Way. I love my Dreaming Way. I've used it for years. I'm very bonded to it, but it's a much more diverse sort of reader that I can, like, it doesn't really have one specific really clear voice like that. It's more like, it's not the typecast character that's just doing the one role. It's like the you know, the sideline character that you see them in every show you watch, right? And it's one dude that he's in everything and like playing all these different roles. Like that's more like the Dreaming Way is, even though that's a weird association to make because it's like one of my top decks.
But that's the thing. I feel like I was just thinking while you were talking, and I'm like, I have the decks that I tend to put in sort of workhorse category for me. The ones that I reach for clients for a variety of topics are those types of decks. So those tend to be decks that are in my very tippy top favorites. My Tarot of Mystical Moments, my This Might Hurt Tarot, my Unfolding Path. There's like several decks actually that sit in that space of like, oh, okay, so this one I can pull for just about any reading because it will moderate or adjust its voice for the question or for the content of the reading. Whereas other decks, like I mentioned, Deviant Moon, Playful Heart, Little Monsters, Tarot. I've got lots of decks that have a very specific voice, and so I only use them for specific sorts of readings. But yeah, like I definitely have the ones that are much more versatile, right? And it's interesting. Like, and some have stronger, more like stronger personalities in the sense that they're like out there, like out front with it. And some it's like this deck can kick my butt or it can also give me a hug. Like it can do both. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting too, because I have a few decks, like I was talking about the Barbara Walker, that's like very, like it's very blunt, it's very to the point. It has like one voice that it speaks with.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, I don't know that it could ever do light and fluffy. I would never reach for it for light and fluffy, but I feel like if I was trying to do a reading of light and fluffy with that deck, it'd be like, what are you doing? So this is me personifying. It would be like, what are you doing? Right? That's a personification. That's a very human language to use with an inanimate object. But on the flip side of that, I have other decks that like, I feel like you're going to nice wash everything regardless of my question or what I need to know or anything. And that's a very specific job as well, right? That's a very specific energy, which means I wouldn't use that if I actually needed the cold hard truth, but I would use it if I was like, okay, I don't need you to tell me what I want to hear or what I need to hear. I want you to tell me what I want to hear.
Yeah.
That's a totally different energy, right?
Yep. And also I feel like there are louder and softer voices. Sometimes I'll put down a deck and it'll have like, it'll be cranky. I don't know if you've had, so like I had this happen with the Beautiful Creatures Tarot and I called it such a brat because I felt like every time I put it down, it like didn't want to behave with the reading. It was like, it was just going to do its own thing no matter what. Like I could not get it to like, listen, I'm asking you this question. It's like, no, we're going to talk about this over here. And I'm like, excuse me. So have you had that kind of thing happen where?
Yeah. I mean, similar, but the one that like immediately came to mind for me was the Phantom Wise Tarot.
Oh,
that deck. Like I joked in a video, and I'm not really joking, but I joked in a video that deck did not like me and I did not like it. It was a very like, there was a very like confrontational energy between that deck. And it has like, the deck is fine. Like I'm not trying to, you know, crap on the deck, but I had issues with it. But even beyond the issues, when I tried to do readings with it, it was kind of that situation where it was like, it wasn't even like it was, no, really, let's talk about this instead. It was more like, I'm not going to talk to you. Period. Like, I don't like, stop pulling me out, send me to somebody else. And which I ended up doing. But there's very few decks that I've had that kind of an interaction with. But there's definitely been a few decks where it's been like, there's been some sort of a disconnect in terms of what I thought it was going to be versus what it ended up being for me. Another good example of that is the Forest of Enchantment.
Really?
Tarot of an Enchanted Forest. Not in a bad way, but like when I first got that, so I was really excited, followed it, pre-ordered, did the whole thing, right? Because it was beautiful and I was so excited about it. And I got it thinking, this is going to be like a beautiful storybook, so calm and comforting. And
I remember this.
That deck is all shadow for me. And I mean, I love it though. Like I love it because I don't have a lot of decks that really do, I feel like, call me out in that way. But it's so interesting because everybody else I hear talk about it, it's like a hug deck for them. And I'm like, I don't know what y'all are seeing or what's going on with my copy,
but this is what's happening.
That deck pulls nothing but shadow for me every time. Like if I want to know what's going on underneath something, underneath a thought, a feeling, a situation, that's often a deck I'll go to because I feel like that's what comes through that energy, or the energy that comes through that deck. But it's, I don't know that I've heard of anybody. Okay, anybody who's watching,
let us know.
And you know, you have had that same experience where it's not nice and fluffy and comforting and supportive. It's a deck. That's really interesting to me when there's this, like, I come into a deck with that perceived idea of what the energy is going to be like, and it like totally does something different, completely different
than what you expect.
And then there's that whole question of, so is that just, I don't really have an answer for this, but I'm gonna ask it. Is that just like my perception and where I was the time I did the first reading that determined that that's the energy that the deck was going to have, or is there something more, right?
It's interesting because I feel like I usually get a feel for a deck's personality in the first 1 to 2 readings. So if that's the case, then it would stand to reason that if you got a sassy reading, it was going to start to feel that way. and then it gets reinforced maybe. I don't know. It's interesting. I'd be curious to hear from other people. I'd also be curious. So you were talking and it made me realize or remember that recently I had a deck come in that I felt like had no personality. And I've had this happen before where it's like an instant no-fly zone. Like I'm not getting anywhere with this deck. It's going to give me nothing. I put it on the table. And I feel like that's especially frustrating because I read so intuitively that, or at least I feel like my reading style is very intuitive. So if I lay down cards, I feel like I can always get something from something on the card, something. But I got a deck in recently, and I was so gutted. But I got this deck in, and I tried to use it during member readings, and nothing. I could get nothing from it, to the point where I literally said, I'm really sorry, I'm putting it away. Like I'm getting nothing. Like I was just like, you have to go in timeout because I can't. And so I've had decks come in before where that's happened, where I just pull it and I'm like, there's nothing here. What is that? So like, where does that come from? Like, what is that? Is it the art style that doesn't resonate with me? Is there something more to this?
Like, is there an actual like energetic exchange that's happening? I guess that's my question too. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then I hear from people who get a deck. I'm thinking of two people I've heard from, Danny and somebody else I saw recently on YouTube. I can't remember who it was, who literally mentioned they got a deck, pulled it out of his box, instant bad vibes. And I'm like, so obviously there's something like, or it could be something energetically going on to sort of like some kind of imprint, some starting point. But at least maybe the way I perceive energy, I just find it also interesting.
I do too. The whole idea of, personification in a general sense, but I feel like the energy, talking about, energy attachment, I feel like that's a part of personification for me.
Yeah.
Like there is a perceived energy in the decks, and is what kind of helps shape the personality of the deck. I mean, it does, the art style comes into play sometimes. I think what draws my attention. So like, for example, with the Enchanted Forest one, there is a lot of actual shadowing, like in the art itself, like the way the artist has drawn things. She does a really good job with light and shadow in that deck.
There's a lot of depth.
The shadow is what draws my attention. So that becomes then this like energetic resonance that's now stood out to me. And so I think it's kind of a blend of the two ideas, like this idea of having a language to, to help us talk about the decks and to help us express our connection to it. But also I do feel like there's some sort of energetic exchange happening in that. Whether it's literal or perceived,
that's the thing. Like it could be either, but I think the thing is, even what I tell myself about sympathetic magic and things like this too, is that even if it's 100% in my head, if it's deepening my relationship with a practice or with myself or with my cards or whatever, then it doesn't really matter if I've made it all up or if it's like, if there's something there to be detected energetically, but I think for me, I think art style has a big part to play in how I'm going to perceive a deck. Like that can be everything from how clean and simple is the artwork versus how busy and chaotic or cluttered it is, like cluttered by definition or by comparison. That can be a part of it. What the personalities of the characters in the cards seem to be like also has a lot to do with it. Like, for example, I'm thinking of the Fountain Tarot, and that deck, everybody seems so kind of calm and collected. And that deck has a tendency to feel very composed and very kind of neutral in that way to me. So it's just interesting because there's obviously, like, I'm picking up on facial expressions in the characters in the deck. I'm picking up on how they're interacting with each other in the artwork. So there's all of that too. I don't know. Yeah, it's really interesting to see what sort of makes a deck's personality. So other than like the Forest of Enchantment Tarot, can you think of another one where you expected it to feel one way and it felt totally different?
Curious Creatures.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That was another one that I was like, I was expecting it to just be like, I don't know what I expect. I just bought it because it was amazing. Like, and like, it's really, really like, it was a literal Lisa made me do it moment. And I don't really know exactly what my expectation was, other than I didn't really expect it to be a serious deck.
Yeah.
I expected it to be just kind of like a for fun thing. I do have some decks that are just for fun, but like that deck gives legit readings.
That deck, I have to say, if you were to ask me, like I think I got it out of sheer curiosity. I got it because I don't know. I was just like, it's so weird. And I actually, when I first saw it, had kind of a viscerally negative reaction to it. I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to touch the 10-foot pole. And then I was like, but I got to see, I got to know, because I'm a nerd like that. Yeah. And I remember getting it in. And if I were to tell you right now what deck in my collection or that I've ever even laid hands on that has the biggest or loudest personality or feels the most like a person or people, a group of people, it would be that one. It would be that one, because it feels like every single card is literally, it's the chattiest freaking deck. It feels like every card has so much personality. It's completely different than all my other tarot in that way. Like it blows my mind. That one, so loud.
It is.
I'm trying to think if there's one that like the Deviant Moon was another one that I got out of curiosity, because I was thinking that like it was going to be creepy, it was going to be dark, but then I got it in person and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool deck. I'm trying to think if there's any that like completely ended up feeling different than I expected. And I don't know. Oh, I think most of the time these are decks that I didn't think I was going to like, more than their personality was way different. Like the Guardian Angel Tarot by Doreen Virtue, that one. That one I thought there's no way, but it was so cozy and comforting.
Yeah, a great one.
Yeah.
I think a couple that come to mind for me, Tarot of the She, because I went into that buying, it's a Fae deck, right?
Yeah.
It's not a Fae deck for me. It's an alien deck, and it's a totally different vibe. It's totally different than like any other Fae deck I have. I don't even consider that a Fae deck anymore. It is an alien deck, and it speaks with those, with that voice, with that energy for me. That's right. So that's one. Also, Tarot of the Cat People, again, kind of in that same vein. I'm thinking like it's a cat deck. Again, it's not a cat deck for me. It's an alien deck. But like we all know, I got an alien thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But those were very different than what I expected.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, sometimes decks that I thought were going to be kind of cold and distant ended up being very like friendly and approachable. But I'm struggling to think of examples, which is bumming me out. But I'm sure that I've got plenty. But for me, it mostly is like, how strong is the personality of this deck and how much is it going to affect the ways in which I'm going to read with it? Which I guess is a question I wanted to ask, or we might have already covered this, but basically to think about how personifying has changed, or I guess if you've always done it, it might not apply, but like how it affects the way that you actually read the cards. Like, so we know that the decks themselves have personality, but how does it impact the way that you interpret?
I think I've always done it.
Yeah, same.
Like it just, and a part of that is because I think it's like, it is art essentially, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's a pip deck, it's still art. It's still illustrated. It's not scenic.
Not scenic.
It's illustrated. As we were talking, I was thinking about, is there any decks that have changed their personality? And one, because you mentioned the Fountain Tarot, and that deck came to mind for me, because the first time I had it, I was like, it's cold, I get nothing. Yeah. Nada, zero, zip, right? So I rehomed it. And then a few years later, I brought it back in. And now, like, it's a very, like you said, it's a very calm, it's a very mind airy deck for me. It's in the mind. If I want to know, like, without any emotional undercurrent, that's the deck I go for. If I want
objective,
cold's not the right word, like the logical side of things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a case where like it'll change and shift per deck.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But I think like overall, I think I've had I don't recall ever not really personifying my decks, because like I have conversations with them. So I think that's the thing. Like, because I'm having a conversation with the cards, then it feels like to personify it feels like a natural evolution of that process.
Yeah. Like it's like if the way that I read was to lay down cards and be like, this card means this card means this card means this, I might feel differently. But I think because, like what you said, I'm having a conversation. It's an interaction. It doesn't feel one-sided. I don't feel like I'm just, like, if I read a dictionary entry, it's one-sided, right? I'm just taking in information. But with tarot and oracle too, if I lay a card down, I feel like I'm considering something and kind of bouncing it around, and it feels like a back and forth. It doesn't feel one way. And I think we both have done readings, you can tell me if I'm wrong, where we've like I'll lay down a card and I'll be like, tell me more about that. And then I'll pull another card. Like I've done organic.
Those are the best ones. I love those.
I love
what
those.
Also came to mind. So do systems have any difference for you? Because as we were talking, Marseille has no personality to me. Like,
really?
no offense to, like, I don't mean any offense to Marseille, but like, I don't personify my Marseille decks.
This is such a great question because, yes, to me, anything Thoth-based feels high vibe, spiritual, woo, big picture, like cosmic. Like it has that kind of, I feel like I can't look at Thoth in a mundane way. I haven't gotten there. Very high spiritual type stuff. So love it, but it's like I have to be in the right. It's like if we were gonna label tarot deck systems as types of magical practitioners, then Thoth would be like the traditional
ceremonial magic type of stuff.
Ceremonial magician, yes. And I feel like standard like RWS based decks would feel like, I don't know, the in-between, like the person who just does like the eclectic witchcraft, you know? And then Marseille to me would actually be very folky, I think. This is going to not make any sense. I'm not going to make any sense, but let me try.
I'm following you so far.
Yeah, Marseille and Pip decks feel like Lenormand to me. All of those feel like direct, to the point, practical questions. Like if I want to find out about money or my job or like whether I should buy a house, I think of Marseille and Pip decks as being my go-to for those types of questions. And if I want to ask a question about general day-to-day life, I think of tarot, like RWS tarot. And then if I want to go big, I think Thoth. So it's just interesting. Yeah, they definitely feel very, very different to me, to the point where now once I kind of figured that out about Pip and Marseille decks, that I tend to like to go to them for really grounded types of questions. Now, if I'm doing readings, I have to have a Pip or Marseille deck within reach, because if I get a question like that, I want to be able to answer with one of those decks.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating.
That's so cool. Yeah. Pip decks sit for me somewhere between that idea of the Marseille being, to me, the Marseille feels like the historian.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like more like consulting a dictionary, like what I was saying.
Right. Yeah. Same kind of thing. Pip decks for me sit somewhere between the RWS and the Marseille.
Yeah.
Because there is enough for me personally in the majors and courts, scenic wise, to pull a sense of personality out of it. But then I do like that the Pips are more in that Marseille of just every day. So it feels like a blend to me, which is probably why I really like it. I also really like it because I feel like getting into, talking about oracles, I feel like when I put a Pip deck with an oracle, it opens up both their personalities.
Yes.
It makes their personalities bigger. So with a Pip deck, that's great because it kind of starts with a little bit less of a personality, or it's a little quieter, it's a little understated. And then depending on what oracle I put with that, I can really play down that understatement, or I can really amp it up.
Yeah, it's almost like having volume control for your Pip deck to be able to like customize how like assertive it's going to be in the reading. That's so interesting. Do you ever mix tarot decks together, or like mix tarot and oracle together based on how you want to blend the personalities of the decks?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I won't, like, in a general sense, I very rarely pair collage and collage together.
Yeah.
Because it tends to be, there's a few exceptions to that rule, but in a general sense, because it feels like it's too much voice, right? There's too many things going on. It's too loud. And so in a general sense, I like to pair like the quieter voice with the louder voice and get them to sort of balance each other out.
Yeah.
Same with decks by the same creators, even though I have there's several creators that I have all of their decks, but I don't tend to put their decks together because it's too much of the same voice.
Interesting. I'm kind of I might be kind of the opposite. I'm thinking, because I like them to all, I like to feel like the voices on the table is the best way I can think of to say it, harmonize well with each other. So, which I think you do as well, but I definitely tend to pair same creators decks together for sure. I definitely do that, to the point where sometimes it locks me up, because then I don't want to ever use them outside of that combination. So then I kind of limit them into that space. But I was just thinking as we were talking that it would be really interesting to pair very opposing voices in a reading to see what that feels like. Like, what would it be like to put the Deviant Moon Tarot for me on the table next to the Guardian Angel or the, you know what I mean? Like, what would that even be like? It sounds chaotic and terrible, but like, I don't know. Maybe that would be really interesting, or to build a spread literally around personalities of the decks, like to literally get did you do this? Somebody did this. Maybe it was you. I have the worst memory. I'm so sorry. Video made around like the council. Was that you? Did you create a council?
Well, I did the Tarot Village. So the people
Maybe
in my
that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you like have almost like you're getting advice from all these different types of like that. I've never done anything like that, I don't think. I think that'd be really cool to do.
Yeah, because I have like I think I mentioned like the Green Witch Tarot is like it's like a community deck, or like the Anna Kay is like my family counselor deck.
Yes, that's probably exactly what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So yeah, then that goes back to the like it's kind of got that job now, and now I've kind of limited to that. So like you were saying, there's pros and cons to it. I think there's more pros than there is.
I think there's more pros. And if you are already the type to want a variety of decks, then having them have different jobs is great, because then you know you're going to go to those for those jobs, right? I like having, I kind of do that with all of my decks, where I feel like each one kind of has a sort of thing it does for me. And because of that, I think of that deck for that purpose, or that type of deck for that purpose. So I often have groupings that kind of fall into the same category.
Because I almost asked you with the, oh my goodness, Fountain. So that deck to me has a masculine voice. I don't call it he though. So I hear some people, they will gender their decks in terms of, you know, giving them a pronoun. I don't do that with my decks, although I do have some decks that I feel like lean more into, like, I feel like we're all masculine and feminine. Like we have it both inside of us, right? Yeah. But I do feel like people, my decks do tend to, some of them do tend to lean more into one energy than the other. So like, you know, thinking of the Fountain Tarot, that to me feels like a more masculine deck. Another really great example is the She-Wolf and the Serpent Fire, both by the same creator. Yeah. The She-Wolf for me has a very feminine energy, and the Serpent Fire has a very masculine energy, even though they are almost completely, like the figures depicted in them are almost completely all female presenting.
That's really interesting. I have the She-Wolf and it feels very powerful and feminine to me. I do think there's certain decks that have a masculine or feminine feel. And I think I feel that I really learned that I feel like with my decks, because I noticed who and in what situations I would want to pull them for. Like, for example, all of Ciro Marchetti's decks to me feel very masculine.
Same,
and I don't know if that's because it's Ciro and I know he's a man. Like, I don't know. Is that where that comes from? Or is there something else to that? I don't know. So I definitely have decks that feel, I'm with you. I think that gender, like within the tarot, it's a flexible thing that describes energy more than anything else. But I certainly have decks that feel really masculine or really feminine. And I do work with masculine and feminine energies in my practice. So that does make sense to me, that I would like have some that lean more one direction than another. And it does limit the way that I work with them. For example, I would tend to go to a deck that feels slightly more feminine to me for questions that I would want to go to somebody with a feminine energy, for example, about. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it sounds really bizarre. I don't do it with all my decks. It's just there's a few that definitely have that kind of leaning.
Same. Like, I don't feel like my Llewellyn, for example, it doesn't feel like it leans one way or the other. It feels like a very balanced in terms of the energy. But there are a handful of decks that feel like they sit very in alignment with one energy or the other. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the people depicted.
I agree. Do you think you could ever just decide to not personify your decks?
I don't think so. Like my whole, like in a general sense, my whole collection, I don't think so. Partially because like some of them I've had for 10 years or more. It'd be like trying to change one of my dog's names.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and just kind of call them by something else, or like say Tucker is a cat. Well, that's a bad example too, because we joke about Tucker being a cat.
Oh no, we have a cat-like dog as well.
Yeah, he's my cat dog.
What if it was like a brand new deck? Like, what if a brand new deck showed up and you're like, this deck, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna give it a personality. Like, I'm not.
I think unless I think unless the deck like inherently had no personality, I don't think I would be able to do it. I think it would just naturally happen.
I think so too. And I think that's the thing. I think that's one of my issues. When I had that deck come in a couple weeks ago and I tried to read with it and I got nothing, that's what it felt like. It felt like it had no personality. And I'm like, is this what it's like to read without personifying? If that's what it's like, I don't like it. I don't want to do it.
There was that one pink deck. I won't say the name.
Same. I know which one you're talking about.
Pink deck that we both got, that I think we talked each other into at the Tarot Symposium.
And then we both got rid of.
No personality.
No.
I got nothing from working with that. It's beautiful. It's fine. It was pretty.
It was so pretty. But
yeah,
nothing.
It was like, you know that old saying, like, pretty as pretty does?
Yeah. Do you want to know what my recent one is?
What?
The Rain Shadow Tarot.
Really?
Yeah. Really? And I was really distressed about it because I love
oracles? You have
what's that?
Do you have one of the oracles?
Yeah, it's the Illuminated Earth, and I love the Illuminated Earth so much. But the funny thing is that I had this exact same response to the Faceted Garden Oracle. I've even had an opportunity to pick that up secondhand at my local metaphysical store. Like, they had a used copy. And I went to the store thinking to myself, it was my birthday month. And I'm like, you know what? I've pre-ordered or I Kickstarter back the Rain Shadow. If they have Faceted Garden, I'm going to buy it. And they still had a used copy there. Second chance to get a used copy. And I flipped through it and I'm like, I don't get anything from this. And it made me nervous about the Rain Shadow coming in. But then I was like, no, that's ridiculous. And then I saw some people like looking at some cards of the Rain Shadow. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so good. And then I got it in. It was completely like flatline, nothing. But the Illuminated Earth talks so much to me. It's so strange.
Here's an interesting question. Do you think, and has this ever happened to you before, that because you are already bonded to the oracle, that maybe the tarot sits too much in alignment? Maybe it's like, like it's trying to like, because there's a few decks for me that I don't have because they feel like they would like sit in alignment, like exactly. I like to give you an example, like the Green Witch Tarot, which is one I love and have, and I will not buy the new Witch's Garden one because I feel like they will compete with each other. And
it's so good.
I'm sure it is. I know it is. I've watched walkthroughs and stuff, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it because I have a relationship with that deck.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I got the other one in, like, I feel like maybe it would just like, it would be almost like this visceral kind of, no, you're trying to take the place of my Green Witch. How dare you?
So I did have this experience. I continue to have this experience. I'm probably going to make this mistake multiple times over, but this is like the Mons Tarot is that deck that for me. I tried to bond with the Whispering Spirits by Joanne. And I mean, when I tell you I'm an embarrassing levels of fangirl of Joanna Nelson's artwork because it's just so my aesthetic in every possible way. But I got the Whispering Spirits, couldn't do it. Got the Cosmic what's the other one called? Cosmic
Beings? I think that's the one I have.
Cosmo Beings, yes. And I was like, this definitely will be fine because it's so different. Like, it's her style, but it's totally different. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. But I have the Mons Tarot in 3 different versions. I have the Lenormand now. I have the Oracle, the Little Bug Oracle, and I think she's working on a Mons Tarot Oracle. That's all going to be fine. But apparently Whispering Spirits and Cosmo Beings aren't because they compete with Mons Tarot. I don't understand why this happens. But that could be what it was with Rain Shadow. Maybe
it's the we're back to the typecast thing.
I think so.
So you've typecast the Mons Tarot, and any other deck that she does feels like your main character stepping into a role that you're not. That's not right for them.
Yeah, it's like no, that's not that. It's you know what it is. It's like when I used to watch soap operas growing up. It's like when they do this all the time in soap operas. They'll just replace a character, and it's like a new same character, new actor. That happens all the time. It's like that. It's like you're playing the same character, but you're a different actor, and it's not working. It's not working. Get out! I want the original actor back. Bring them back. So yeah, it's like that. And I wouldn't think that would have been what it was with Rain Shadow because I was so excited to pair it with the Illuminated Earth. But I think you might be right. I think it's like, no, I just want the Illuminated Earth then. And it annoys me because I want to collect all the things because I love their work so much. But then they just sit there and I'm like, oh, well, that's not helpful. That I think I have some decks in my collection whose voices are strong enough that I can't have anything else in that same category. Like, for example, the Deviant Moon. If I get anything that even tries to act like the Deviant Moon personality wise, I get rid of it because I'm like, I'm only ever going to reach for the Deviant Moon for this. That's kind of one place my brain went. Yeah, like it's like I have exclusive.
Trying to be something you're not. You're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Witch, so just don't.
Yeah. So I've got certain decks like that, and then I've got a whole bunch of decks that cover that sit in broader categories, which I think is more along the lines of what you were asking. So like I do have a lot of decks that sit in a firm but supportive space. So decks that are going to be approachable and relatable is probably the best way I can think of to express that. They're going to be relatable. They can go into the shadow and they can go into like super cheerleader mode, but most of the time they're kind of in that middle, more moderate space. And that can vary across art styles. I think if I was to say like aesthetic wise, I have a lot of like, actually, I don't even have that many like inner child. As much as that's my aesthetic, I don't have a ton of that. I feel like I just have a lot of decks whose voices can go darker or lighter depending on what is needed. I have very few decks that are exclusively very positive or exclusively like the Deviant Moon, very shadowy. I tend to have a lot of things that can kind of run the gambit of.
Yeah. So like the majority of your collection probably sits in that middle space.
I think so.
I feel like mine does too. It sits in the middle space, and I have some decks that like have very distinct personalities, voices. But I would say overall, that's not the majority of my collection, because I think there's levels to personification. I guess that's the point I'm trying to get at. Like some of them, you know, have like Barbara Walker keeps popping to mind, because that's one of those that just has like, that might be the deck that has like the most loudest voice in my collection for me.
Yeah.
And that's like a kind of few and far between if you look at the grand total of my hundreds of decks, right?
Yeah.
Most of them sit in that, they can be either or, they kind of sit in that middle space. There's only really, you know, a small portion of that I feel like really has a very distinct personality. And honestly, those are some of my favorite decks.
Same. Like if I think about when I answer prompts around like what's your top 5 or your top 10, I'm always grabbing for my most distinctive voices. The Deviant Moon, the Mons Tarot, like, or the ones that I use all of the time because they're so versatile. Like their personalities are so. If I were to like think about my decks as people at a party, I could. That would be a fun tag. Oh my god,
you should start that one.
Like I should do that one. But I was just thinking like you know, because there's decks that fall into like this one's kind of antisocial and like nobody likes them, but like they have they have really interesting things to say when you talk to them, or like the social butterflies, or the people that kind of are always milling about. Like I have a lot of decks in that kind of milling about area, the ones that can get along with everybody, you know. I have a lot of those. So that's probably where most of my things sit.
I think same for me.
And I think it's because anything that has too distinctive a voice, as I said earlier, nothing can compete with it. So nothing stays that has that similar voice. So those can't accumulate in number the way that more moderate voices can accumulate in my collection.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing, because I was thinking earlier today, I was recording a video, and not all of, like, I have certain decks that, like you were saying, they don't have an equal in my collection. Because it is, their voice is so distinct, or like not necessarily even like big and loud. It's just distinct. It's very unique. And anything that I bring in that feels like it's trying to be that and that same thing, that same way, like it doesn't stay. I don't end up keeping it. It's like, I was thinking of it in terms of like decks that they have no equal in my collection, but it's a personification thing.
It is, for sure.
Yeah.
It is for me. Yeah. Like that's the thing. It's that nothing can hold its own because its voice is so specifically unique. Like you said, it's so distinctive that, And it's funny because those are decks also that I find very difficult to pair.
This is why this came up for me, because I was doing a pairing video and I'm like, oh, you do not want to play with anybody.
There's a couple of decks I have that are great specifically for those kinds of decks. One of them is the Sacred Creators Oracle, which does a very good job of like coming in when nothing else wants to play nice with a deck. I can pull out Sacred Creators and put it next to it most of the time. I've got one or two that I can do that with. So
my OG Thoth is that way. It doesn't want to play with anything ever. Never.
No.
Like,
no, the Thoth is one of those that I only want to work with by itself.
Yeah. I mean, I have a few other Thoth-based decks that are fine and I can pair with, but like anything that is like really in alignment with the OG Thoth, like it's like, no, I'm not. Except for on occasion, I have paired it with the original RWS. That's fine. because that gives me two very distinct voices.
I
And
can totally
that's
see
kind
that.
of like what you were talking about, using two things that are completely like opposite. I guess they kind of are, but they kind of aren't. Like they're kind of out of the same thing, just two different branches of the
Angles.
same tree. Yeah.
But their personalities, those two decks feel very different.
They're
So I know.
very different, but they
Yeah.
work really well together on the table, because I feel like the like traditional like basic, that's a terrible word, but you know what I mean, the traditional RWS gives me that very mundane everyday, and then I layer the Thoth like literally on the table over the top of it, and it gives me that higher vibration of that energy. And so that is the only deck that I can really ever pair with the Thoth, which is kind of funny because like Waite and Crowley, they didn't play so well together.
No.
So, but their
No.
decks play really well together. So
That's so interesting.
like that.
It makes me think of, do you ever have decks that, because I've had this happen a few times, where something about their voice or something about the way that you're working with them makes them feel like you don't want to pair them with anything else, so you just use them all by themselves?
Yeah, I have a couple of those.
Yeah, I have had that happen, I feel like, a lot lately.
I've got that tends to happen a lot with Marseille for me too. So I've got the new little squid cakes, which is amazing, and I love it. I have nothing to pair it with. Nothing. It doesn't want to play with anything. That's the one that I was trying to like, oh, maybe I could do it.
Oh, that's the one.
That's the one that it was like, it didn't matter what I threw at it. It was like, no.
Never mind. No thanks.
But I like it just on its own. Like it doesn't need anything. I don't need to add layer to it. I don't need to expand it. I don't need like it just, that deck for me just doesn't need another voice.
That's interesting, because I just realized I don't think I've ever paired my Marseille at all. In fact, I think I only ever use them individually.
Yeah, same for me.
And pip decks, I'm kind of the same too a lot of the time.
Yeah. I pair my pip decks all the time, because like I think that's really where they shine for me, is putting them with Oracle. There's only one Marseille deck that, and I don't know that it's even really traditional Marseille. It's that like Tarot de Ozarks one. That's that very that one I can pair, and I have paired. But in a general sense, I don't really pair Marseille. It just like it has. So I say it was kind of like that historian. It's just like it just wants to do its own thing.
Yep.
And just, you know, it doesn't need all the acolytes coming in. You know,
it's like introverted Marseille. It's kind of introverted.
Yeah. It's like, I'm here. I'll give you the message, but like, then can you leave me alone?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's and you kind of have to coax the message out differently from Marseille, I think, than more scenic decks. That's so fascinating.
And I had just said that Marseille doesn't have a personality. The squid cake is the exception to that.
I was just gonna say that one does feel like it has some personality.
It has a personality, but it is I don't have a huge Marseille collection anyway, but like off the top of my head, that's the only Marseille that I would say that I would personify. Yeah. Also because like it's full on nostalgia vibes for me, and it feels like the old Nickelodeon's cartoons.
It totally feels like Nickelodeon for real.
It's like Doug. It's like Hey Arnold. It's like, you know, it's like all of those. And so, but that's me adding a personal lens over the top of that deck.
Yeah.
So then we're back to, does it really, or is that just my?
And I think, but I think all personification, and maybe this is the point, I think it's also personal, because it's how we're interacting with and perceiving that particular art, how we're interacting and perceiving the way that the messages come through in that deck, and also the tone of the guidebook, the tone of the creator. All of that, I think, can play into the personality that we ultimately feel in our decks. But for me, I would like to say, or go out on a limb, I guess, and kind of say that if I wasn't personifying, I probably would only have 3 or 4 decks, maybe 10 for different art styles. Maybe I'm full of crap. Maybe I would have 100. I don't know. But like, so much of what I get from my decks is their different voices. Yeah, like that's the point.
That's always the language that I hear the majority of people when they talk about their decks. We talk about it. Maybe we don't necessarily, you know, clarify that, oh, I'm personifying this deck. But the way we talk about them, even just, you know, not putting it in the box of I'm personifying my deck, it's the way we talk about it just feels like it sits in that language in a general sense. And I think that's because we're human. So we're using human language. And for me, I think that's a lot of what it comes down to, is it is a thing that we can use to describe a felt experience. Like,
Yes.
this is what I feel when I work with this deck. The deck itself isn't like, it doesn't have feelings of its own because I don't see it as being a sentient thing.
Same.
But it's reflecting back my feelings.
Yes. And I think that's the thing to remember. I think when we talk about personification in general, I think the assumption could be that we think that these decks like literally have these different personalities. And I think for most of us, it's just like you said, it's a descriptive language we can use to work with that deck, to understand how we work with that particular deck and how, like, what kinds of questions we might ask it or what we might pull it out for, who we might pull it out for. And, you know, it's like, I wouldn't pull out the Deviant Moon for like my grandma, you know what I mean? Like it's like that. It's understanding and having language for how we think of, perceive, and work with the energy of that deck. But I think you and I are very aligned in that we still see them as pieces of paper. They're pieces of paper that over time become important to us, but they are still pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And that would be really interesting to hear from people who watch this, is to hear if you personify, or even if you don't, like, what is your feeling about that? Does it feel more like I don't know, do you feel like you have a personal relationship with it, or is it more a matter of having a language for working with it? I would love to just hear people's thoughts on that, for sure.
Personally, yeah. Yeah, because I feel like my decks feel different than like my pens, but they're both tools.
Yeah.
Really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how, you know, some things we personify, some things we don't. Like, I'm sitting here holding like a crystal skull because my fidget thing, this to me has a personified energy. Yeah. Like, this dude has a name. Like, it's a personified energy. It has a particular thing. But like this one here, I'm going off topic. This is just a little tiger's eye palm stone. This is not, I don't personify this one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I definitely get personified. Most of my crystals, especially my tumbled stones, most of my tumbles have a certain amount of personification. Like, this one is very soothing. This one is very calming. This one is very like strengthening or invigorating. But I don't actually think those rocks are giving me those properties. And I'm not, no fault to anybody, no thoughts or judgment about anybody who does. It's just that for me, it's just like, yeah, it's like a personification for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such an interesting topic.
It is an interesting topic. Thank you for having it with me. I'm glad we could sit and talk about all this.
Yeah. And we apologize for missing last month.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We did. We just kind of moved everything forward a little bit. We had a lot going on.
Yeah. You know, busy, sick, whatever. So next month we'll be doing or talking about deck collections. Yeah, that'll be various facets and forms. So that'll be a fun one. And that'll be next month on my channel.
That'll be a really meaty discussion. I'm looking forward to that. Just talking about all the different ways we manage our decks, acquire them, keep them, don't keep them. Should be juicy.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. So hang out with us for that. That'll be on Dawn's channel next month. And thank y'all for hanging out. Thank you, Dawn. These are so fun.
I know.
All right. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.